Today we are talking with two Lisas. So Lisa Heineman, who is in history, and do you have another department right now, Lisa?
In gender, women's, and sexuality studies
Okay,
as well.
I,
Yep.
I thought so. And Lisa has worked with the Obermann Center in numerous capacities, including being co-director of Germans in the Midwest, a humanities symposium, and more recently, fellowship in residence. And then Lisa Schlesinger, who several summers ago, 3, 4, had an interdisciplinary research grant with us and developed a project that she might mention later. So these two haven't really spent much time talking or working together, so this is kind of an exciting conversation, but there's a lot of really interesting overlap in their current projects around sort of being in limbo, which I think a lot of us are right now. So Lisa Heineman, I've been aware of your current book project for a while, and why don't you introduce that right now and how you are understanding that book through this current moment or vice versa?
Yeah, I'm so excited to take part in this conversation. I'm just really interested in reflecting. I'm always interested in reflecting on the way, as a historian, how does history make us revision the present, but also how the present makes us think about history in ways that we never thought of before. And I'm on a project that I've been working on for quite some time. It's a book that draws on my own family history, my father's family in particular, and it covers several generations through the 20th and into the 21st century. But the moment I'm thinking about a lot now regarding this feeling of being in limbo is sort of at the chronological heart of the book. There's a period there where a couple, my grandparents, who were German Jews, sent their 2 sons, my father and my uncle, to Britain as unaccompanied child refugees. That's what we would call them now. At the time, the program was called the Children's Transport or Kindertransport. And I have a lot of correspondence, and of course I've read a lot of history on this stuff. And what I'm thinking about so much now is this feeling of being in limbo over those years. And particularly what's striking to me as I read through their correspondence is how they grapple with this feeling of separation, which to them, that's the definition of limbo, being separated. Because the dream is, of course, this family should be reunited. And
Can I ask, Lisa, I'm sorry, how old were the boys?
Oh, thanks for asking. My father was not quite 9, and his older brother had just turned 12.
Okay.
So really they're about 3 years apart. But one of them was a child, and one of them was verging on adolescence, and that made a big difference in some of what I'm grappling with here, because, they have kind of a normal family life, under strain. They're German Jews in Nazi Germany, but it's a family life. And then they're separated in June of 1939. And initially, the parents think that they might be able to follow pretty quickly. They have other relatives in England. So there's a feeling of this separation as a kind of a temporary interim, but it might be over pretty soon. And then the war starts. And it's clear that the separation is going to be longer. And it's much harder for them to send letters. So the nature of the separation changes. And then at some point, my grandparents end up in a Nazi ghetto. And again, that what it means to be kind of in limbo in terms of separated from your family also starts to interweave with the fact that actually life is going on in many ways, but in many ways that aren't what anybody had expected and which are so divergent. The 2 boys grow up. My father, who goes from being a kid, basically like 3rd grader, by the time he sees his parents again, he's in his final year of high school, right? And something 3 years further down the line for my uncle. After the war is over, my grandparents both survive. They're liberated, but then it takes 20 months for them to get reunited with their sons. So there's this additional period of, now we're in limbo again. We lived through the experience, but we're still in limbo. When is life going to finally start again? they finally get together and things go on from there. And there's several more decades in the family history that I write about. But I gotta say, I'm just thinking a lot about what it means to start out feeling that you're in a short-term limbo, and that life might return not quite to the way it was before. They'll be in England instead of Germany. We'll be post-pandemic rather than pre-pandemic. But maybe we're talking about a few weeks or a few months. And what happens when you start to shift that thinking to, oh, this is a longer term. And in the meantime, other things are shifting, and the boys are growing up, and the parents are going through their own experience. And what happens when the after is just so radically different than the before? So those are some of the things, just to give you a little bit of the color of the story I'm telling. Those are some of the things I'm thinking about. And I have to say that with the experience we're all having now, we're in this short term now, we're wanting things to go back to normal. We're not quite sure what normal means, how far away it'll be from the old normal. But we also don't know whether we're talking about weeks or months or years. And we don't know if we're talking about just a pandemic or also an economic depression, right? There's so much we don't know. And our lives are going along, and we're having relationships with each other. And in the meantime, we just don't know how time is moving.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, it's fascinating parallels. Yeah. Lisa, I keep referring to other Lisa who's wearing black right now. If you could jump in and tell us what you're thinking about.
Well, I'll give the frame of this project I've been working on, which is called the Iphigenia Project. And it considers Iphigenia as a metaphor. I'm a playwright. And so the first part of this project was thinking about Euripides' play, The War is On, and Iphigenia is sacrificed so that the soldiers can go to war. And basically they're told, Agamemnon, the king, is told, if you kill your daughter and you go to war, you'll win the war. And so he does. Only, no one knows if Euripides actually wrote that she was killed at the end of the play or if she was transported to another country. And because she comes back later in another country and she's alive. So to me, it seemed like that is the refugee experience, that you're in this kind of liminal space somewhere, another country or another land. You're not a citizen, you have no rights. You could disappear in that space, and historically you can disappear. And then when you come back, who are you? To yourself and to the rest of the world. So the first play in this project was dealt with that, and it was a musical-ish play. Most recently, the second play in this project is an opera, and I've been calling it Ruinous Gods, and it's about resignation syndrome, which is a syndrome that affects children. They found it in Sweden, and it's been studied in Sweden. It affects children. Basically what happens is children are in limbo, in this kind of limbo, awaiting asylum, and they get used to the country they're living in, they get used to their school, they get used to their friends, but they have this constant stress of not knowing if they're going to have permanent residence and permanent asylum. In other words, they don't know if they're safe. And often what has happened is once they find out they are not granted asylum, but sometimes even before this happens, they fall asleep and they don't wake up. And they're in this kind of coma state for a long time. As often happens with things, I think this is in the collective consciousness. I'm not the only person who's working on this. I think there was an Oscar-nominated short film about it. And recently there's a photo in the AP World photo contest of a young woman who wakes up at the moment of her waking up. What I've been working on is this opera with Layal Shakir, who's from the Divan Orchestra. She's a Lebanese composer. And that's kind of where we were before the pandemic hit. what I dreamed of for this opera was a fairy tale opera where the protagonist falls asleep and then dreams of other people who are also falling asleep. So each person is dreaming of another person, and each inside of each person's dream is someone else's dreams. And just the idea of like stitching together fairy tales in which people fall asleep. It's like a common metaphor for us that of falling asleep when we're too traumatized to stay awake. And I felt myself from some life experiences that I could feel that myself. And I think we have this in our own country. It's not just in Sweden, that people have an experience of somehow falling asleep to different levels or turning out or dissociating, and what that experience is like. And so that was the beginning. And I thought music is a thing that can transport us, because just normal story, I don't think can transport us in that way. I kind of want the audience to go with us on this journey and feel it with our bodies. So now that we're in this pandemic and the stress of this pandemic is here, I think I'm re-envisioning this whole project even to consider it even more metaphorically. What does cause us to fall asleep, to drop out? And what will bring us back? And I'd really like to work with a neurologist as well to see what happens to the brain. At what point are we able to wake up? And so like the theme here is, you know, limbo, liminal space, and also sleeping or leaving, dissociating, and then what awakening.
Fascinating. Yeah.
That's so interesting, Lisa. You know, I loved, first of all, I loved your first play in this cycle. I just found it so moving, and it sort of made my heart stop. It just sort of leaves you in this very mysterious space. And when you talk now about sleep, not only kind of the literal sleep of resignation syndrome, but sleep as metaphor for kind of a pause and a reaction to trauma, whether it's, you know, literally sleep. I'm thinking about some of the readings I've done, both kind of in the sort of scholarly world I encounter, but also some of the correspondence I'm grappling with, where especially children who are separated, in my case, during the Second World War, one way of dealing with that being to kind of retard your own development, to kind of try to stay a child. So when your parents come back, you can pick up there again, right? And of course, these are very often children, right? Who, right? They're not deciding to do this, but it's this kind of not literal sleep, but kind of slowing things down, trying to slow down your development in response to trauma. So when you reemerge, you can re-grasp the familiar maybe a little more easily.
Do you know, in my research, I've heard that that this possibly happened during World War II. Have you come across anything like that, or anything familiar to that kind of experience?
Yeah, I wondered that too. I saw the documentary you're alluding to
Yes.
about resignation syndrome, and I wondered very much about the camps in World War II.
I haven't, and my suspicion is that first of all, I haven't, which is not to say that it didn't happen, because there's 100,000 memoirs alone, never mind scholarly work and letter collections and so on, and untold stories from the Holocaust. My guess is that if you had something like that, Jennifer, it wouldn't be in the camps where you can't just fall asleep.
Right.
You know?
Right. You have,
but I can imagine perhaps people who are in hiding. That's the place I could imagine that.
Mm-hmm.
Hidden children, shutting down in that way. which of course, and again, this is purely speculative. There might be other scholars out there in my field who have come across these cases that I don't happen to know about. I'd love to learn about them. But I also think that there, specifically the stress of being in hiding, where making noise can be life endangering, you know, a kind of a shutting down in response to understanding that noise is a mortal threat. And maybe the pressures of the people who are hiding you, right? You feel like, you know, they're saving your life, or maybe they'll expose you or send you out if you're not, that could be a way of responding to that. That's the environment I can imagine that may be happening, but I have to say that I'm speculating right now. I haven't actually read cases like that, but it strikes me as a real, just such a profound kind of psychological response to that kind of strain and fear. And there's a kind of fear that's about the moment, and a moment might be an hour or a day or even a couple of weeks. And then there's fear that's about months and years. And that's the thing where, again, the kids you're talking about, we're talking about something that, this kind of limbo and feeling of threat that goes over years. And that's just a really different world to me than a kind of flash of a moment of fear.
Something else we were touching on when we were talking before we hit record, and that is really interesting to me, is this notion of returning to normal. And, you know, kind of what is normal? And in both of your instances, you know, there are these people who are in these periods of like very much traumatic, a lot of movement. I mean, refugees moving, you know, great distances, separations, etc. And they're kind of, I would imagine, longing for this moment in time from before it started, when things seemed normal. But I mean, I'm thinking like both through the lens of historians and in theater, like we tend to ignore normal. Like, I mean, you don't tend to read books about, you know, historians, you know, about, or go to great theater productions about normal. I don't, so it's this, and it's like, you can never really get back to normal. So both of your stories just make me wonder about the use of that word and what people are longing for, and what might be the outcome.
That's maybe, you know, you're right. We don't write stories about normal. We write stories about transformation. And I think rather than looking to go back to normal, we look for the kind of change that makes us better able to be in the world, or to help us be more humans in the world. So I guess that's kind of the reach that drama reaches for. I would imagine, you know, a person in everyday life seeks normal. But I guess that's why I stretch for the metaphor. The metaphor is, you know, where's it going to take us, right? So I guess I have not thought about going back to normal at all. I don't think we will go back to normal. My hopes and dreams now are that we'll go to a place where we're more awakened, and we're more compassionate, and we're more empathetic, and we're more inclusive. I'm not seeing that in the press. Like, the first layer of everything I'm seeing about the moment we're in right now is not looking very good. And I'm noticing who is disappearing in this time as well. So that's kind of related to the project in that way. Like, the first set of refugees we saw in 2014, 2015, for a flash moment, people were visible coming across the Mediterranean. And immediately my fear was, how long will we look at them? How long will we see them? And what will we do? And, you know, 5 seconds historically later, we were in the 2016 elections. We weren't seeing refugees anymore. We were seeing this big, you know, thing happening. This pandemic is doing a similar thing. There are really big issues. The coronavirus is right at the front of, but the people are disappearing. So what I'm hoping and praying, and I'm looking for the wise people who will help us find our way through, is to bring visibility back to all the people who are being affected by this. And my fear is, you know, that the same kind of structures are going to win out, erasing a lot of people and pushing, you know, big corporations forward and so on.
And Lisa, just to Heineman, just to switch it slightly, I know you said that your students are writing about the pandemic, and are any of them taking up this question of normal, or what's, share a little what's in their minds?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I don't think in any of the stuff I've read in my own research, I don't think any of them actually use the word normal, you know, in German or in English, you know. And I mean, it's sort of, historians don't talk about normal because we talk about change over the time. And the whole point is that things are constantly changing. There is a tendency to have a special interest, particularly popular interest in history is often around extremity. It's around, you know, people are very interested in wars and revolutions, for example. And I think in the world I'm looking at, there's a desire, many of the people I'm looking at, let's say the earlier generation, my grandparents' generation, you know, they'd been through the First World War, they'd been through the you know, so there wasn't really a kind of a reference point that's normal. There was a notion of a warm family life. Everything else might constantly be changing, but those deep, intimate, personal relationships, that was the key. That's the anchor. So my students now, I think that my students in both of my classes, I'm having them write pandemic diaries. Partly, you know, both of my classes are on European history, and we're sitting here. They are having an American version of an experience of the pandemic, but nevertheless, we've talked a lot about primary sources, right? And they've been reading memoirs and they've been reading diaries, and I'm like, you know what? You all can make primary sources 50 years from now. When people write the history of the pandemic, they can read the newspapers, they could, you know, watch the videos of presidential news conferences, but they're also going to want to read about the experiences of people like you. So they're writing these pandemic diaries, and it's been so, well, first of all, so wonderful to read them. And I do think in terms of their understanding of normal, it's funny because we've had conversations at the very beginning of the semester about what is your generation? Let's assume they're all roughly the same age. They're not quite, but there's a kind of a cohort voice. Where do you see where you are in history? What's formative for you that's different than your parents' generation? And they already had the feeling that sands were shifting, right? They're very fearful of climate crisis. They're very anxious about shifts towards authoritarianism. They're very anxious about their place in the economy. They're accumulating huge student debt, and they didn't know whether they were going to get a job. That was before the pandemic, right? So in some ways, they kind of use a language of normal because it's part of our culture. When will things get back to normal? But if you stop and think about where they're coming from, before the pandemic, I don't think they thought things were normal. They felt like things were always in flux, and in flux in ways that were really destabilizing and scary to them. And now it's even scarier. So I think that that seeing them go through that at their stage in life, we talk a lot in our classes, but also in my research about life stages. What does it mean to be a child versus an adult going through a moment of crisis? And for them, they're young adults. Mm-hmm. What does it mean to be at that moment? And whatever was imaginatively normal already didn't apply. And now it's just even crazier.
It's off the board, yeah.
Yeah.
So I have a feeling that we can close as we intended to open. So Lisa Schlesinger, you had a quote that you wanted to share, and I have a feeling that might be apt here, but
Okay, I'll read it. It's from Arundhati Roy's recent article, "The Pandemic is a Portal," and it was in the Financial Times. She says, historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our data banks and dead skies behind us, or we can walk through lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it.
I love that quote.
Yeah.
It's wonderful.
Yeah, it's a wonderful, I'll put a link in the description of this video to that article. It's great.
I love the image of a little luggage. What is it really important to carry through?
Right, right.
Yeah. Thank you both.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, delightful. Thank you.